Hello, and a very, very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us for this special NAIDOC Week edition of Data Science in the News. It's jointly hosted by the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and Queensland University of Technology's Centre for Data Science. My name is David Lovell, and I'm a professor in QUT School of Computer Science and in the Centre for Data Science. Now, even though we're all experiencing this meeting online, we're all standing on the lands of Australia's First Nations owners. And I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands and pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. And recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. And I want to also acknowledge that we celebrate NAIDOC Week on Sunday. Hooray! So this week is a chance for us to appreciate and celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And as a non-Indigenous person, I'm pleased and very honoured to be moderating this session and to express directly my appreciation, support and encouragement to everyone of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage and everyone who is working for change for the better, whether it's seeking proper environmental, cultural and heritage protections, seeking constitutional change, a comprehensive process of truth-telling, working towards treaties or calling out racism. This is something that we must do together. Now, this year, NAIDOC calls us all to make a genuine commitment to get up, stand up, show up, and support and secure institutional, structural, collaborative and cooperative reforms. So thank you all for getting up, standing up and showing up today to hear from and to talk with our four excellent panellists who are Angela Leitch, QUT's Pro Vice-Chancellor for Indigenous Strategy. Angela, hello, welcome and congratulations on the recent launch of QUT's Indigenous Australian Research Strategy.
Thank you, David.
A great achievement. I'm also delighted to welcome Professor Peter Anderson, who is Executive Director of QUT's Carumba Institute, which exists to unify and empower QUT's efforts to build a world-class Indigenous Australian research environment. Hi, Peter, how are you going?
Good, thanks, David.
Good to see you. A very big hello to Dr. Veronica Matthews, Senior Research Fellow at Sydney University's Centre for Rural Health. Veronica, thanks so much for joining us today and for our discussions in the lead up to the event. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. I'm also really mindful that I'm looking at the rain outside the window. You're looking out the rain outside the window. You're in Lismore today, right?
That's right, David, yeah.
Yeah, so I can understand some nervousness about the rain that's coming. Fingers crossed that we'll all be able to navigate this well. So
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. I'm really looking forward to hearing from my colleague, researcher and manager of QUT's Centre for Data Science, Becky Cook, who's going to be sharing data-informed perspectives on student engagement. Becky, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, David.
It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on this side of the screen today.
It's a real pleasure. Welcome to everyone. You may notice that one of our panelists is missing. Alas, our friend Raymond Brunker from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Community Health Services is not healthy today. He's down with a flu. Raymond, we miss you. We wish you a speedy recovery. Now, in the spirit of NAIDOC Week, we've asked our panelists to share their thoughts, perspectives, and highlights on the research and leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues, with a particular focus on the role of data and data science in various professions, organisations, and communities. The way this session will run is that we'll hear from each of our presenters for 7 or 8 minutes or so, and we'll open up the floor to questions. But as we go, we really welcome your questions and comments and thoughts via chat. So please do send them in. Our challenge today is time, and it's a challenge because we could easily spend an engaging, enlightening and enjoyable hour with any one of our panelists. So I'll make sure that we get a good balance of input from everyone and a good discussion at the end. So with that, it's now time for me to invite our first speaker, Angela Barney-Leitch, to share her perspectives as QUT's Pro Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy. Welcome, Angela. Do you have some slides that you'd like to share with us in this?
I think I'll just talk first, David, and see how we go.
Good on you.
Okay, so good afternoon. Can everyone see me?
Yes, we can
Definitely.
see you well.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be another one of these sessions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Indigenous strategy here at QUT, but before I do, I'll just introduce myself. So Dalatale Pro Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous strategy, QUT Nugu, Enkabul, Wapabara Nugu, Ata Nugu Yagara, Tali Baragangapun Nugu, Turubul Nyagara, which is just introducing myself as an Aboriginal woman from off the central coast of Queensland. I'm a Wapabara woman, and I'm just recognised that I'm on Turrbal and Niagara country. So I just congratulate the organisers today for putting something together for NAIDOC Week, and the Get Up, Stand Up, Show Up kind of theme, or how we talk about how research and how researchers can fill into that space. And I know today we're talking a particular focus on data and data science. And I would love to come back and talk a little bit about how data science has worked over the last 20 years or so in my profession as a policy officer. But for today, I'm just going to talk a bit about the Indigenous research strategy, because if we look kind of closely at this year's theme for NAIDOC, it presents some messages about moving beyond the rhetoric and the empty words and promises, and sort of coming up with something substantial to kind of make change and to amplify Indigenous people's voices. So our strategy here at QUT has a vision for kind of building on and supporting Indigenous Australian research excellence and innovation. And it was developed by my office and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Researchers area, along with Professor Grace Sarah, Professor Peter Anderson, who's on the panel, and we did get some support from Professor Chelsea Wadigo as well. And so, as always, data played a big role in developing this strategy, and for it always plays a role from my policy kind of background. And how do you actually target people specifically? If you don't have the data about what's happening to that specific group that you're focusing on, then you end up with this kind of neutral, bland kind of strategy. So I'm going to say it's played a key role in developing what we're doing. And when we did that, we started to have a look at what was happening in the Indigenous research space at QUT. But also what was interesting is there's a whole absence of data in this space. Okay, so that also tells us something. So it makes us think about what do we need to do to fill that space, or to actually come up with something to find out what's happening in there. And the other thing that data is going to help with this is actually have a good look at how do you measure what your outcomes are. And the Commonwealth Government in my previous life, there was a lot of focus on input. A lot of people focus on input, but we need to focus on output. And we have to make sure that we're measuring the right type of data, because different people have different ways, you know, it's saying if you're looking at Indigenous student attendance, which Peter might talk about, but it's kind of like, how do you measure that? And if you just give a general kind of measurement, it looks pretty good in some ways, but if you go down to individual schools, it doesn't. So it's about how you actually look at the data to see that your strategy is actually working. So it will continue to have a role through the implementation of this strategy. So what is the strategy, as I'm rabbiting on here about it? So I'm not going to go through all of that because people can read it. But I think one of the key things, if you look at it, we're talking about building critical mass at QUT, which is something that QUT currently doesn't have. And the theme around all of the research is to look at Indigenous excellence. So Indigenous people aren't here for you to capacity build us all the time, but to recognise the excellence and the knowledge that we bring when we're doing research and our unique ways of looking at things like data and research. So this strategy recognises that Indigenous Australian academics and researchers and alumni make a significant contribution at local, national and international levels, and that's about the research excellence that's in there. Some people have commented on our the racism that we've got in there, and that's received some interesting kind of conversations about what is that about, but it's also received some really positive kind of comments saying, you know, it's about time we started looking at the racism, and there is racism in data, which someone may bring up later on, but it's also about how we need to start looking at the structures and the policies within the way we do research within a university that can impact on racism and how racism then can come through in our research. So this strategy has a few kind of focus areas, and like I said, it's about our research and it's our talent and building on our kind of capacity that the Indigenous staff already have in many spaces. And I know I'm not saying that ECRs can't learn, because we all got to learn somewhere, but we have to realise that Indigenous people don't come with nothing. We actually have unique perspectives in the way we actually develop. And so how do we build that as well as the other knowledge that we need to have? And I'm looking at the time, sorry, and I'll just quickly say something really quickly. Our measures that are there, they need to be pulled apart. How do you measure that? How do you use data to, we can't just have HDR roles and completions. There's 8 completions. We've got to look at where they're from and how that works and what sits behind that. 2 quick strategies I'll mention that are in there is our QUT Ignite scheme, which is for ECRs and MCRs to work with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. And that's what Raymond would have talked about when he came, if he was here, to talk about the research we've done with them, but also our pre to postdoc, I'll take that off, our pre to postdoc pipeline, which is looking at building our HDR students and then moving them into an academic career. It's an 8-year strategy, so it's a really big commitment by QUT. And through this strategy, I think that we're looking to change the narrative about how the university conducts research with and for Indigenous Australians. And I'll just kind of say that, you know, it's kind of been documented since colonisation that we've been positioned as objects of research, and it's a legacy of extraction and often, you know, things taken without our consent, and that this strategy is trying to address that in some ways so that QUT staff don't continue that. So, and QUT, hopefully through the strategy, kind of acknowledges our responsibility to address that situation. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Wow, that's fantastic, Angela. Look, I know we've only got you for a limited window because we managed to find this 30-minute gap in your busy schedule. Thank you so much for that. I've a question for you in relation to how this strategy came to be, because it's so well balanced and so well thought through. What was the process of getting to that point? Because clearly there's been a lot of thought and consultation that's gone into it. Could you share a bit about that, please?
I think so the way it's developed, when I came to QUT, I am not coming up with these brilliant, you know, these ideas on my own. There's a lot of staff at QUT who've been saying things for many years. And so part of it is gathering those voices and looking at what they've been saying over the years. And then the next thing is to develop with Aboriginal people. So Peter and Grace were really instrumental in saying, well, what do you think needs to go into this space? Because although we can look at the data, in some ways, the data kind of says kind of what's sort of happening, but doesn't really go into a lot of why. And Aboriginal people can tell you why that data looks like that. So we actually talked to, so it was really good. It's between me and Christopher, and then who's the head of research, and then Peter and Grace. And then another part of it is we sent it out to all the Aboriginal academics to have a say. So because we wanted the Aboriginal academics to feel that they could see themselves in this strategy. It wasn't set out to the non-Indigenous academics, just saying, but we did ask the executive deans what they thought of it, and they were quite keen with what the Indigenous staff had put up.
So that's an interesting point I'd like to understand more about, because I think the message that comes through strongly for me from NAIDOC week is that change is something that we have to do together. How do you navigate the issue of like together, meaning Indigenous and non-Indigenous academics or the wider community? Do you have thoughts about that togetherness?
I do. What's been kind of interesting actually in developing this, when we actually talked, and Peter might say something later on, but when we actually sent to people and said, okay, so we want GERD to do this, or we want a different research area to do this, we really didn't get pushback from non-Indigenous staff. Yep, been waiting for this. Great, put it in. So they were really good in doing that. I think QUT is quite unique in that way. We have a lot of supporters here at QUT. But I think one of the things that we also need to realise around research is that we will never have enough Aboriginal researchers. We need non-Indigenous researchers to undertake research in a more effective and culturally appropriate way. We know that they're doing a lot of research on us. The data shows us that. Is it effective, and are they actually measuring the right thing, and are they interpreting the results through their own cultural lens, which means it's not really the result of the Aboriginal people. So I think that we do need to work together on that. We do need to come up with ways of doing that. The Carumba Institute has got some things that they're looking at and building it into kind of units that non-Indigenous academics will undertake, which is good. But I think we do need to work together, and I think a good way for academics to learn is to actually do research with an Aboriginal community organisation, like Raymond would say, because pretty soon if they stop talking to you and your research ends, you know that you've done something wrong. But I think that we can work together to get the outcome we want for our community.
Yeah,
but they have to be willing to learn and to listen and be led.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I think also that what you're talking about listening and working with people has broad applicability, because some of the issues that you've described about being researched on and here, give us your data and so on, there are other groups, for example, older Australians, or you can name any group you like, where often the attitude of researchers is like, oh yeah, you tell us, give us your data, and we know what we're doing. So I think what you're describing is something that needs to be taken account of in engagement with groups of all different natures and backgrounds. Do you have, and I know I'm going long with you on the questions here, Angela, because you're going to have to leave at 12:30, but do you have thoughts about the lessons that other areas can learn from what you're achieving in describing these strategies about working with people?
Do you mean other areas of the university,
or
other areas of the world?
Yeah, like thinking more broadly, because there's any number of groups that we could, like academics could study or research. But what you're describing is that whenever we work with people, it has to be with people. So I think there's really important messages that are broader than Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as a group. I wonder if that's something that you would agree with, or what your perspectives are.
I think that research is changing, isn't it? It used to be developed by white men sitting there, and they would say, and everything would be through their lens, whether it was gender, and that was usually straight, whether it was about their gender or their sexuality, and everything was just focused in that way. So in some ways, I kind of think you need to really revisit some of that research from back in the day. So I think that as the world is aware, becomes more aware of people and people's differences, I think research will change to focus on that. One of the problems, though, is, someone's a researcher for 30 years or whatever. How do we get our researchers who have been around for that long to change the way they do things? Because our young ones coming through and they'll be doing something different, but we've still got this other group that we need to work with. And some of them are great. They'll change and they'll go, that's right, I need to do that. Others, maybe not so much. But I think that if a university is really going to fulfill its role about being a social good, a university or an organisation for social good and making positive difference in the community or in the world, then that's something that they need to do.
Angela, I applaud what you and others have done in pulling together this strategy for building and supporting Indigenous Australian research, excellence and innovation. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We know you'll have to scoot off at 12:30, but really appreciate your time now. And now it's time to turn. No worries, it's a pleasure. It's time to turn now to our colleague, Peter Anderson, who is director of QUT's Carumba Institute. And as well as directing the Institute, Peter is a very active researcher with special interests in organisational leadership and education, and is currently working on the importance of data-led decision-making in teaching, which is a topic of great interest to all of us involved in education. Peter, welcome. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. So firstly, I'm Peter Anderson, and I'm a Warlpiri and Murrumbidgee man from the Northern Territory. So I cover the Central Desert and the Northwest, Daly River area. So very close to where Raymond's from as well. So just, put that there. But firstly, the way I come to data, I guess as a educational researcher is, I'm a qualitative researcher, through and through. And so you look at interventions and where data is, when you bring data into the mix, it then becomes less impersonal if you're just looking at a whole lot of statistics. Now, as somebody working in Indigenous education, one of the things as a result of colonisation was that the education system was set up to actually assimilate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Governor Lachlan Macquarie, and he's even got a university named after him. He had the decree, and it's a 14-point decree of, the education of Aboriginal boys and girls in Parramatta. So for us, this is still within generations of our lifetimes. And I think for educationalists, it's when you look at statistics on NAPLAN, etc., or, which I'm doing some work with a PhD student in the data science area and looking at achievement data. For me as an Aboriginal teacher and educator first, each one of those statistics is actually a person. It is actually somebody in my family. So I can't not actually get emotive. And they say, stop being so emotive. And I think that's what happens with Indigenous researchers, is these interventions, these things are actually happening to our families. I may just be sitting here, but that's completely different. I have a different worldview in life to many members of my family with low education rates, all of those things. So I think that's the angle in which I engage with data and engage with researchers, that, and particularly with the project that we were all on between Carumba and the Centre for Data Science is the Australian Research Data Commons project, which is actually around Indigenous data sovereignty and how do communities control their data? How do they share their data? How do they use their own data as an asset? You know, because most of these community organizations, they're at the front line in terms of our community work. Like they're you know, taking care of people, they're the health services, they're, you know, and the data is sort of out the back. But it's so important, and it's such an asset to an organization to be able to tap into that data and to use it really well. And so for me, that's the, I guess I come from it the other way, that's also the emotive part, is that these are real people, these are real human beings as such, that is standing behind the data and really, you know, unpacking and implementing those principles of, you know, access to data as a human right. You know, and what that actually means in all facets of one's life and endeavors. I think there's a lot of fundamental principles that we need to unpack first and actually start, you know, putting them into action. Or, you know, I won't say enactment, because that, you know, everyone has an enactment policy or process. It's like, how do you actually do it as the verb? You know, this is what we're doing. It's like anti-racism. Anti-racism can be really fuzzy. Okay, and many people and organizations, I've just done a report for the Diversity Council and also with UTS, 98% of Indigenous people in the workforce face racism. 98%, I mean, what's going on? And people say, oh, I'm anti-racist. That's almost like a, you know, soft and fluffy, it's like a cloud, you know. I've done that and it's like, no, well, what are you actually doing? What are the interventions that you're using and drawing on the data to actually, you know, one of the things is racism, it's a workplace issue. But sometimes, you know, we have identified in the data, but it never goes to the Human Rights Commission. It's actually against the law, to be honest, you know what I mean? Like there's these concepts that, you know, that are pushed around. So I think the Get Up, Stand Up message is actually, how do we start the doing? And it's not always up to Aboriginal people to be doing that. We should be guiding and working with people to do this. Or being in good, you know, or being in an organization where suddenly you're going to wait for the Aboriginal person to come in and save you all from all of your foibles. You know, it's the worst thing ever. And we've all, you know, looking around the room, those of us, we've all seen those jobs around and sort of, you know, those sorts of things where one person then carries an entire burden of an institution, or our academics carry this burden of, you know, wanting to do so much. So I think, you know, in terms of data, there are only 756 Indigenous academics nationally, and that's level A to E, you know, so just playing the numbers, I mean, we, you know, that in and of itself is something to think about in terms of making change and having that impetus to actually, you know, get in and do something, you know, because we'll say, well, look, they made a mistake, poor fellas, but at least they're trying, you know, and if you won't learn unless you don't try. That's the teacher in me, you know. So that's my thoughts on the use of data.
I love the fact that you've put one number, which I think really starkly illustrates the sort of imbalance here: 756 academics in Australia. So Peter, I have a question for you in mind with respect to the use of data. In a few short weeks, I'll be kicking off DSB 100, Fundamentals of Data Science. Do you have words of wisdom to me or others who are teaching the next generation of data scientists about how to open their eyes and minds to the experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and other groups who have different life experience to what they have? Do you have any quick thoughts on that?
I think the role, you know, if we're teaching or as an educator, is also to instill in our students that this is about citizenship, you know, like getting them to actually understand what, you know, data as a human right is. It takes it out of, you know, it's actually bigger than them, that it's actually about being a good citizen. It's actually being a global citizen. And this is just through practice. Sometimes we think about, you know, what's the best way to eat an elephant? You know, it's like you got to start small and sort of have these conversations that are built up throughout, I think, the learning journey, so that a student is not disengaged at the end, that, you know, that they actually have a real interest and will engage in, say, forums like this in their professions, rather than saying, oh, I have to do that because it's cultural awareness.
Yeah. I would like to say publicly a big thank you for pointing me towards the United Nations human rights approach to data, which I think is an excellent document that speaks directly to the intersection between human concerns and data concerns. And that's going to certainly get a run in week 1 of Fundamentals of Data Science. Thank you for that and for your words just now. And that leads us now to our next presenter, Veronica. And Veronica, as we were talking in the lead up to this meeting, you're very much a numbers person, having had a background in epidemiology, but also someone who understands deeply what Peter referred to here, that there's a story behind the statistic and a number behind the narrative. So welcome. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts in this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Angela and Peter for the yarn. There is a lot of overlap in what I was going to say as well, but just by way of background, I am a saltwater Maori from Quandamooka country, Manjarrabah. Very lucky to live and work on Bundjalung country, and I do pay respect to the Widjabul Waiabul people, who are the traditional owners here, and also the traditional owners on the unceded lands where we're all gathered on today. So yeah, I'm coming to this conversation from a research perspective. I'm a health systems researcher. I am part of a couple of deadly collaborations. One is the Centre for Research Excellence in Strengthening Indigenous Healthcare Systems for Indigenous Healthcare Equity. And the other is the Healthy Environment and Lives Network. So both are really looking to improve our mob's health with a focus on holistic health and also including the social and cultural determinants of health, which includes the important connection to healthy country that plays for our well-being. So as Dave said, I'm a quant researcher by training. I have a numbers bent, but over time, my career in research, I've come to appreciate, as Peter was saying, that the numbers are representative of communities, of people's lives. So I really do appreciate that the importance of stories and that they are data as well. So how the numbers really complement stories, or really what represents the lived experience of communities. And I think, reflecting on the NAIDOC theme about change, we really need both data and narratives to be able to make that change. The emotional aspect is what Peter was talking about. Yeah, and Angela's point, particularly when you consider that the role that research and statistics has played in sidelining First Nations worldviews. So since colonisation, the fact that our knowledge, our lives, our possessions, our way our society has functioned has been analysed and documented with a Western lens, which has really corrupted our own historical and cultural narrative. And I'm a big fan of Palawa scholar Maggie Walters, who says that population statistics and social statistics aren't neutral. They are glazed with meaning that comes from the dominant society, the norms and values of the dominant society, which is then created, perpetuated, and normalized this deficit and dysfunction discourse that has shaped our nation's psyche. And has really fed into the structural institutional racism that we see now in health and in other sectors such as education that Peter touched on. But not to say, and Maggie Walters says this as well, that we shouldn't report data on these issues affecting our mob. But why focus solely on the problems when there are other facets in our lives that contribute to good health, that are valuable and are worth celebrating? So we need to bring that balance into data collections with other indicators that capture First Nations worldviews. And there are First Nations researchers like Ray Lovett at ANU, Galgavi at UQ, that are beginning to do this. So I think academic institutions are slowly recognising the importance of bringing First Nations knowledges into balance with Western knowledge. And it's really about, well, for Stride and Heal, it's about the way that data is captured and who is doing that capturing, who is doing the analysing, and also who's translating that research back to community. But we don't deny the value of Western science, and I think that's an important message. How Angela was saying that there's, certain academics who have been around for a long time who don't necessarily understand our Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing, and almost feel a little bit threatened, I think, by the place it can serve in academia alongside Western science. So I think we need to recognise that bringing together the two knowledge systems will generate those innovative solutions that we need to address complex issues, both effectively and sustainably. But I think listening to community is the first step in that process. So an example that I wanted to draw on is a project called Healing Country that Professor Kerry Mengerson from QUT and others have helped to bring to life. It's about a very complex issue, climate change, a very urgent issue. So we know from Western data, from environmental and health data, that our mob are disproportionately experiencing climate extremes right now. So extreme heat in the centre, floods, droughts here in Bunjalung country, and also the sea level changes that Torres Strait communities are experiencing. So this is robust, while it's deficit data, it's robust evidence that supports what communities have been saying, that they are experiencing these extreme weather events. But also key to finding the solution is Aboriginal knowledge that has been built up over millennia. We are the oldest living culture. We have survived through periods of great adversity. So there is so much value in our knowledge systems, and so much to learn from communities about how to support climate change adaptation. And this is what Healing Country essentially is about. So we're at the very early stages of the project, and we're working with 3 communities. It's really these communities that will be driving the project. They located in diverse sort of geographic areas. So we have local community map makers in Warramunga country in Tennant Creek, Wajak Noongar country in Perth, and here in Bunjalung country in the Northern Rivers. They will be respectfully gathering the traditional knowledges of their community. And these then will be layered with model climate and health data to provide a comprehensive picture of what's likely to happen in the future with climate change. We envisage that these community story data maps will be interactive, will be online, and will provide then an advocacy tool and also a decision support tool for communities in terms of then compiling their local adaptation plans. But sustainability too is a key aspect here. So we want, while we want the bells and whistles of this fantastic creative online platform, we want the maps to remain dynamic and to be in the hands of community, which is an important aspect of data sovereignty, so that they can add new data and stories as they unfold, essentially. Yeah, so that's about all I really wanted to say. So yeah, it's about Aboriginal communities leading systems change, which is really in alignment with the NAIDOC theme for next week, and just recognising the need that we need both data and stories, the human experience, to drive that change.
That's a wonderful message to keep in mind, Veronica. One of the things that I observe is that people like working with data as numbers divorced from stories, because you can do things quickly, not always the right things, in fact often not the right things. You need to understand those stories, and that understanding requires us to listen and learn and take some time. Do you have any thoughts about that tension between the society that we seem to be living in at the moment, which is like, quick, do something now, and the fact that, yeah, to do something wise takes a bit of time to listen, learn, and understand? Do you see that tension?
Yeah, I definitely do, Dave, particularly in the climate change context, because we don't have a lot of time. But that's where we need to work holistically as well, and ensure that governments listen and take steps to mitigate emissions. I mean, that's what we've got to do, to pull a brake on changes, these extreme changes to our environment, which ultimately affect our health and well-being. But yeah, I mean, just continuing with the status quo, it's not working, right? So we've got to think about new ways of doing things, and if it takes time, then it takes time. And we have to learn from our cultures, which is a very patient culture, and it's a very in tune culture with our environment. So I think the key is really working with communities from the outset and incorporating knowledges.
Veronica, thank you for sharing that, and we wish you every success in the work that you're doing towards climate adaptation. Thank you so much. Our final panelist for today is Becky Cook, and I'm proud to count Becki as a colleague and friend with whom I've had many illuminating and insightful discussions. Becki brings to this conversation I think a real wealth of experience in engaging students, especially Indigenous students, in tertiary education. Becki's research provides insights from the student's perspective on how universities can enhance engagement and improve student outcomes through opportunities such as nuanced undergraduate research programs. Becki, it's lovely to have you on the panel today. I'm really interested to know more about using research as a way to increase student engagement.
Thanks, David. I'm going to break the tradition today and pop up a PowerPoint.
Good on you.
Because that's the way I've prepared for today's discussion. So
we can see it. It looks beautiful.
Excellent. So my presentation today is going to explore Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students' perspectives on engagement at university and how these can be used to enhance and empower participation in research. So in accordance with Aboriginal protocol, I would like to begin today by acknowledging the Kumbalmerri people of the Yugambeh language group as the traditional owners of the land where I am today, down here at the Gold Coast, and also pay my respects to the Turrbal and Yagara as the traditional custodians of the lands where I work at QUT. So in the next 5 or so minutes, I want to talk about using evidence or data collected from students' own lived experiences to inform student success, support, and engagement at university. I'm also going to give an example of how we've put this into practice by explaining how some of these perspectives have been used to develop our Centre for Data Science Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander HDR pathway program. However, I do just want to take a moment to situate myself and to share why this is important to me. So I am a Nunukal Aboriginal woman with connections through my dad to Minjarrabah or Stradbroke Island. My own journey through the education system and my working career has shaped my perspectives. I was the first in my family to go to university, and I came to university to study science because of my biology teacher. She saw my potential and pushed me to do well in the subject at school. So very early on, I learned how having a positive role model within the education system can be really important and impact your decision-making when it comes to education. So this is why I then also decided to become a science teacher, and then ended up working in an Indigenous education unit at university and providing support to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. In this role, I could see how accessing and engaging with the Indigenous education unit had a positive impact on the students' experience and their successes, and I wanted to enhance this further. So what does one do when you're working in university? You decide to enroll in another degree, even though I vowed not to. So I enrolled in a research master's and aimed at exploring the student engagement and taking an evidence-based approach to student success and support so that we could improve our service delivery. So given the time frame, I'm not going to provide a full overview of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participation in higher education. Both the panelists today have already touched on this a little bit, but I do want to just provide a quick status update to show why enhancing student engagement is important, and also include some numbers in the presentation. So according to the latest census, we now represent about 3.2% of the population, but in university, we only represent about 1.5% of university students and only 1% of HDRs. And I haven't calculated the percentage of the academics, Peter, but I'll have a look at that 756 and see where that fits in the scale too. We also have lower participation rates, lower success rates, and higher attrition rates compared to non-Indigenous students. And we've touched on some of these reasons for this in terms of how colonisation has impacted the education system and past policies that were designed to relocate or assimilate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples into Western society, and how this resulted in exclusion from schooling and then perpetuated this educational disadvantage. And while we have some, and led to the stats that we do have today. So just one other key thing to talk about the journey to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participation in higher education. Universities were established for 100 years in Australia before an Aboriginal person graduated with a degree. So in the 1970s, Indigenous education units such as the one I worked in and was the basis for my research were created in order to provide support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And traditionally, this support has been provided from a deficit view. And I could see that students who came into the unit weren't always seeking these traditional forms of support, such as tutoring or crisis management. And I really wanted to explore this further. Literature suggests that programs and initiatives are most successful that are targeted at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are most successful when they're designed, led and implemented by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So if I wanted to enhance student engagement, it was really important for me to include the student voices and perspectives within the study. So students highlighted how the unit provided a collaborative space where they could share knowledge and converse with other students from various disciplines, and this further motivated them to study. It was also a culturally safe space for them to unpack their coursework amongst their peers. Students also said that opportunities to enhance their studies were so valuable. And one of these experiences was the Congolandi Undergraduate Research Program, and it came up several times within the conversations with students. The creator of the program, Jennifer Campbell, described the Congolandi program approach as a strengths-based research training framework that recognises existing ability outside of institutional definitions of success and adapts to student needs with multi-layered support. It increases student self-confidence and interest in conducting research. So it became very clear to me that opportunities, when delivered in a culturally and appropriate and inclusive way, such as undergraduate research, empowered students to persist in their studies and in their success in university. These findings of the desire for students to be in a collaborative and multidisciplinary environment and to participate in undergraduate research that meets their needs have formed the foundation of our Centre for Data Science Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Pathway Program. So students spoke so positively about their undergraduate experience and how it further engaged them in studies. And it also provided a pathway to HDR, something they hadn't previously considered. So our program has been developed to include 3 parts: creating awareness amongst students and community, providing paid research experiences, and also providing HDR top-up scholarships. So awareness is created through showcasing to current QUT students, prospective students, their families and community members the diversity of data science and the HDR experience benefits. So HDR experiences and benefits of undertaking a research degree, and in particular, how data science can positively impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities. The research experience will enable QUT undergraduate students, postgraduate students, and those who've completed undergraduate study at other universities to gain research experience before enrolling in a HDR program. Participation in this program is flexible and allows for family, study, community, and cultural commitments. Students within the program will be connected with each other, current students in the centre, HDR students in their disciplines, and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander HDR students, as well as the Udjura unit in the Carumba Institute. While we don't have a large cohort yet to get together, we'll be doing regular check-ins to adapt support to student needs, because we want to provide a culturally safe space for students to gain research experience and share these experiences with each other. And lastly, financial support will be provided both through having the research experiences as paid and also scholarship top-ups. The expected outcomes from the program are going to be to attract more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students to HDR, but also based on previous experience around the Congolandi program, we're likely to see increased student engagement in their current degree, improved student grades, increased student confidence, students increasing their connection and engagement to the Udjura unit and the Carumba Institute, which will further benefit the students in their studies and also have awareness amongst their peers of research and what possibilities there are. Gaining a valuable research experience and problem-solving skills which can be taken into the workforce. And we hope to provide an opportunity which engages students in research and empowers students in their success, eventually having HDR students mentor other students in the program. If you want to find out more about it, it is on our CDS website, but so far we're pleased to say we've got 2 students who are going to be participating in the program in semester 2. So just to finish off, some final thoughts that I have, and these are things I think that have already been touched on previously by some of our other panel today, is thinking about how we can be working together and collaborating with other areas within the university and other organisations. We can think about how we can make existing opportunities and programs more inclusive and open to students. Ask students and engage in conversations about what works for them. Provide opportunities for students to connect with others, and including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the research and the development of programs and initiatives in a genuine way. And that's it.
Becky, thank you so much. It's really interesting looking at that and thinking about the experience that students have had in recent times. It's not gotten easier for students, and I think you know, that sense of a safe space and belonging is something that a whole range of students really crave. Can I just ask, when you think about the support and encouragement that's provided by students' peers, what is your sense these days about the peer environment that students experience as they go through tertiary education? Do you think it's a more supportive one, a less supportive one? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the peer experience depends on, I guess, how engaged students are with other students and with their peers at university. And the thing about the space, whether it's a research centre like Centre for Data Science or Udjura Unit or Carumba, it enables people to come together to be able to share what they're working on and to hear what other people are researching and what their experiences are. And so by creating these environments where students have this connection to each other, they can learn from each other and they can hear what other students are doing, and then they've found that it makes them more motivated to study or to come into the centre or to turn up, you know, for what it is that they're doing that day. So the peer experience is really valuable, and we're really fortunate that, you know, we have these spaces where we can create those physical places where we can create opportunities for students to connect.
And fortunate too for your leadership in this space, Becky. Thank you. We have time for a few questions. One's come in from Sam Huntley to host and panelists, is asking about thoughts on strengths-based research questions and approaches involving Indigenous Australians when working in the advocacy space. Sam's keen to move away from a deficit model, but at the same time wants to show the need for research and effort to be undertaken. It's a really great question, and I wonder if any of you have any quick reflections on that. Go, Peter.
I think it's just also first, humility is the first thing. Second is that Aboriginal people and communities aren't waiting for you to come and research them. So I think the first thing is then to think about, why am I engaging with the community first? Like, what is the, thinking about the methodological approach, but then also thinking about, well, have you actually asked these people what they need? That's for me is a really, it freaks me out sometimes from some really, really intelligent, sort of people. We tend to not say, okay, so what do you think is working? How can, and then taking that voice and then sort of shaping it into what you're doing. And I think, for many communities where we don't want to be researched as such. So, because we know the outcome.
I can tell you part of the reason why academics often don't ask the people who they're seeking to assist. And that's, for some of us, it's not in our training. As an electrical engineer, I wasn't taught to ask anyone about anything. And I think, as I see technology playing out now, I go, hang on a sec, it's absolutely critical that we understand this. Veronica, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, similar to Peter, I think it just comes down to respect and, that relationship building. It's so essential for proper, research done in a proper way, to have a long-term relationship with community. I'm lucky to be in a research collaboration that's been around for some time. So we do have those sort of long relationships with health services and particular communities. So I agree. It's not about, what your interests are. You just really need to listen to community.
Yeah, I note we've had another question come in from Owen Forbes on a similar view. Becki, do you have any thoughts or reactions to this particular question?
I guess what I'm thinking is that, it's becoming really clear to me that, I guess when I started thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I thought, oh, but my research isn't data centric. I don't feel like I should be here talking about this. But then listening to you guys today and then thinking a little bit more about what we're doing, it's really important to capture that narrative around the data. And then also from, I guess, from, the way our information is being shared and captured through stories and storytelling. There's no reason why we can't, include our stories as part of that information, and to, it's all part of, it all needs to work together. And I just think that collaboration is really important, and to ask these questions and to create these opportunities to engage in this way today has been really, really valuable from, I guess, for me too.
Becki, I couldn't actually think of a better way to draw the session to a close than what you've just said. I think it's a wonderful message to take away from our time together. And in bringing the session to the close, I'd like to thank each of our experts for their stimulating, very thoughtful and insightful presentations. I also really want to thank the audience for the questions and the positive feedback that's been coming in. I know we haven't been able to get to everything, but we are taking note of the questions that come in and looking for opportunities to follow up. So look, it's just been terrific. So we will have the recording of the session posted on our website. Yeah, so again, panelists, on behalf of all our listeners, I really want to thank you for your time, your insights and your efforts in delivering positive impact from data. I'd like to thank the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Data Science for initiating and hosting this seminar series. Data Science in the News is an ongoing series that looks at what's topical in the news with the data science lens, so stay tuned for future webinars on our website and our Twitter at QUT Data Science. Special shout out to our colleague Tim McCougar and to Becky Cook, as always, for technical support and orchestration. Brilliant work behind the scenes. It's been a great hour, so I hope that sets us up for a great weekend and a great NAIDOC week. Thanks everyone for being with us today. I'm David Lovell. Until next time, go well. Take care. Bye.